His calm voice drew my attention in a way that I had not felt in many years. His lips brushed against mine with a softness that felt both strange and familiar, like a forgotten memory returning after a long winter. His touch carried a cool gentleness that awakened something deep inside my spirit, something that had been asleep for far too long. When his hands rested carefully on my back and pulled me closer, I felt my resistance begin to dissolve. My heart beat faster, and the warmth of his presence wrapped around me like a dangerous comfort. For a moment, I forgot everything that should have mattered. I forgot the promises I had made, I forgot the life I had built. And before I could stop myself, I melted into his arms. That moment was the beginning of a story I never imagined I would live through. A story about loneliness. Oh, a story about temptation. And a story about the night my rent was due. But my landlord had another plan. Before I continue, I want to take a moment to appreciate every single one of you watching this story. A big thank you to all my loyal subscribers who continue to support this channel. Your support truly means everything. And to all the new viewers and returning viewers who have not subscribed yet, thank you for being here as well. I cannot wait for you to hit that subscribe button because your support serves as the fuel and energy that keeps this channel alive and growing. Also, remember to share your thoughts in the comments section after this story. Your opinions and experiences make these stories even more meaningful. Now let me tell you how everything began. My name is Elizabeth Carter, and at the time this story happened, I was 32 years old. I lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside Columbus, Ohio, in a small apartment building that had seen better days. The paint on the walls outside was beginning to fade, and the wooden stair railings creaked every time someone walked up to the second floor. Still, it was home, or at least it used to feel like one. I lived there with my husband, Daniel Carter, a man I had loved deeply when we first met 8 years earlier. Daniel had once been full of ambition and laughter. He had been the kind of man who could fill a room with energy simply by walking into it. But time has a way of changing people. And life has a way of revealing cracks that love alone cannot repair. By the time this story began, our marriage was already quietly falling apart. Daniel had lost his construction job almost a year earlier after his company downsized. At first, we believed it was temporary. We believed another opportunity would appear quickly. But months passed. Then more months passed. Soon our savings disappeared. The tension inside our apartment slowly began to grow like a storm cloud that refused to leave. Daniel became quieter every day. The man who once made me laugh until my stomach hurt now spent most evenings sitting silently in front of the television. Sometimes he drank. Sometimes he simply stared at the screen without really watching anything. And slowly, without either of us noticing at first, the distance between us began to grow. I started working longer hours at a small clothing store in the mall. The pay was not great, but it was enough to keep food in the refrigerator and lights on in the apartment. Unfortunately, it was not enough to keep everything else together. One evening, I came home with a tight feeling in my chest. I already knew what I would find taped to the door. A white envelope, the rent notice. I stood there in the hallway for a long moment before pulling it down. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The message inside was polite but firm. Rent overdue. Payment required immediately. I felt my stomach sink. We were already 2 weeks late. I walked inside the apartment slowly. Daniel was sitting on the couch, as usual, staring at the television with a blank expression. I placed the notice on the table. He glanced at it but said nothing. That silence hurt more than any argument. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept racing through impossible solutions. Borrow money from friends, work double shifts, sell some belongings. But none of those ideas could solve the problem quickly enough. The next morning, I decided to speak directly with our landlord. His name was Michael Bennett. Michael was in his early 40s, tall, calm, and surprisingly well-spoken for a man who owned such an aging apartment building. He had bought the property a few years earlier and had been slowly renovating parts of it. Most tenants respected him because he was fair and rarely raised his voice, but there was something else about him, something observant. Michael noticed things, and I had noticed that he sometimes watched me in a way that made me slightly uncomfortable. Not in an aggressive way, just curious. His office was located on the first floor of the building. When I knocked on the door that morning, my heart felt heavy with embarrassment. Michael opened the door himself. He looked at me quietly for a moment, as if he already understood why I was there. I explained the situation carefully, my voice slightly shaky as I described Daniel losing his job and the financial pressure we were under. Michael listened patiently. He did not interrupt. When I finished speaking, he leaned back in his chair and studied me for a moment. There was a long silence in the room. Then he spoke calmly. He said he understood that difficult times happen to everyone. He also said that most landlords would already be filing eviction papers. But he was not like most landlords. I felt a small wave of relief begin to rise inside me. Maybe he would allow us another week, maybe 2 weeks. But the way he looked at me made my heart beat slightly faster. His gaze was not cold. It was thoughtful and strangely warm. He told me that he might have another solution for the situation. At the time, I did not fully understand what he meant, but something in his tone made me feel uneasy and strangely curious at the same time. As I left his office that morning, I could not shake the feeling that the conversation had only just begun. What I did not know then was that Michael Bennett had already been watching my life for months. He had seen the cracks in my marriage, he had seen the loneliness in my eyes, and he had already started forming a plan that would soon change everything. And unfortunately for me, I was about to become the center of it. The days that followed my conversation with Michael Bennett passed slowly, and yet the weight inside my chest only grew heavier. Every morning I woke up with the same question pressing against my mind. What exactly had he meant when he said there might be another solution? At first, I tried to ignore the thought. I focused on work, on keeping the apartment clean, and on pretending that my marriage was still something worth saving. But reality has a way of returning no matter how hard someone tries to escape it. Daniel was becoming more distant with every passing day. He rarely spoke unless necessary. When he did speak, his voice sounded tired and irritated, as if the world had somehow betrayed him. I tried to encourage him, tried to remind him that difficult seasons eventually pass, but my words seemed to bounce off him like rain against a window. Soon I stopped trying. The loneliness inside my own home became unbearable. There were nights when I would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling while Daniel slept beside me, and I felt as if I were living next to a stranger. His back faced me most nights. The distance between our bodies on that mattress felt wider than the miles between cities. I missed feeling wanted. I missed feeling seen. And perhaps most painful of all, I missed feeling alive. 3 days after the rent notice appeared on our door, a storm rolled into the city late in the evening. Dark clouds covered the sky, and heavy rain began pounding against the apartment windows. Daniel had gone out earlier that afternoon to meet an old friend. He claimed they were discussing a possible job opportunity, but I had heard similar promises many times before. By 10 that night, he still had not returned. The apartment felt unusually quiet. The sound of rain filled the room as I sat on the couch, wrapped in a thin blanket. My phone rested beside me, but Daniel had not called. I tried to distract myself by reading a book, yet my mind kept drifting back to the same place. Michael Bennett. His calm voice. The strange warmth in his eyes when he looked at me. I hated myself for thinking about him. But the truth was simple. He had listened to me that morning in a way Daniel had not done in months. And that alone had left an impression. Around 10:30, there was a knock at my door. The sound startled me. For a brief moment, I hoped it might be Daniel returning home, but something about the knock felt different. It was slower, more deliberate. When I opened the door, I saw Michael standing in the hallway. Rainwater glistened on his dark coat, and the dim hallway light cast soft shadows across his face. He looked at me quietly for a moment before speaking. He explained that he had been checking the building during the storm to make sure there were no leaks or electrical problems. When he noticed the lights still on in my apartment, he decided to stop by. His voice remained calm and respectful, but there was something deeper behind it: concern, or perhaps curiosity. I invited him inside without thinking too much about it. The rain outside had grown heavier, and the hallway felt cold. The moment he stepped inside, the atmosphere in the apartment seemed to shift slightly. Michael removed his coat and placed it near the door. His presence filled the small living room in a way that felt strangely comforting. We began talking. At first, the conversation was simple. He asked about my job at the clothing store. I asked about the renovations he had been planning for the building. But slowly the conversation moved into more personal territory. He asked about Daniel. The question made my stomach tighten. I tried to answer politely, explaining that Daniel was still searching for work and that things had been stressful lately. Michael listened carefully, his eyes focused on me in a way that made it impossible to look away. Then he said something that caught me completely off guard. He said that he had noticed I looked lonely. The words hung in the air between us. For a moment I felt exposed, as if someone had opened a window into my private thoughts. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound felt forced. Michael did not smile. Instead, he stepped slightly closer, his voice softer now. He explained that owning the building meant he observed many things about the lives of his tenants. He noticed when couples stopped laughing together. He noticed when someone spent long nights alone. And he had noticed me. My heart began to beat faster. Part of me knew I should end the conversation right there. I should thank him for checking on the apartment and politely ask him to leave. But another part of me did not want the moment to end, because for the first time in a very long time, someone was paying attention to me. The rain outside continued falling heavily as the silence between us grew deeper. Michael stepped closer again. I could feel the warmth of his presence now. He spoke carefully, explaining that the rent situation did not have to become a crisis. He said there were many ways people could help each other when life became difficult. His tone remained calm, but the meaning behind his words slowly became clear. He was offering me something, an arrangement, a solution that did not involve money. My mind raced with confusion and disbelief. I knew exactly what he was suggesting, even though he had not spoken the words directly. The room suddenly felt warmer. My heart pounded loudly in my chest. I should have told him to leave. I should have reminded him that I was a married woman. But instead I stood there frozen between guilt and temptation. Michael reached out slowly, his hand gently brushing against mine. The touch sent a quiet wave of electricity through my body. It had been so long since anyone touched me with care, so long since anyone looked at me as if I mattered. The loneliness inside me finally broke through the walls I had built around it. When Michael stepped closer and placed his hands softly on my back, I did not step away. Instead, I allowed myself to lean into him. The moment felt surreal. His embrace was warm and steady, and for a brief moment the problems in my life seemed to disappear. Then he kissed me. The kiss was slow and careful, almost hesitant at first. But the emotions I had buried for months began rising to the surface all at once: loneliness, frustration, desire, regret. I knew the line I was crossing. Yet in that moment, I chose not to stop. The storm outside continued raging, while inside my small apartment I made the decision that would forever change my life. I allowed myself to fall into his arms. And with that single choice, the fragile pieces of my marriage began to break apart. But the truth I did not yet understand was this. Michael Bennett had not simply acted on sudden attraction. There was something far more complicated behind his interest in me. A secret that would soon turn my moment of weakness into a nightmare I never saw coming. And when that truth finally revealed itself, I would realize that the price of my unpaid rent was far greater than I ever imagined. When I woke up the next morning, the rain had stopped, but the storm inside my heart had only just begun. Soft morning light filtered through the thin curtains in the living room. For a few seconds, my mind felt blank, floating between sleep and reality. Then the memories of the previous night returned like a sudden wave crashing against the shore. Michael Bennett, his arms around me, the warmth of his voice. The moment I allowed myself to forget everything that should have mattered. My chest tightened as guilt began spreading through me like a slow poison. I sat up quietly and looked around the apartment. Michael was gone. The living room looked normal again, almost as if nothing had happened. His coat was no longer hanging near the door. The couch cushions were arranged neatly, and the silence in the apartment felt heavier than usual. But inside me, everything had changed. I wrapped my arms around myself and sat there for a long moment trying to process what I had done. I had crossed a line that could never be erased. I had betrayed my husband. Even though our marriage had been struggling for months, even though loneliness had slowly eaten away at my emotions, the truth remained the same. I had made a choice. And choices always carry consequences. A deep sense of shame settled inside my chest. Around noon, Daniel finally came home. The moment he stepped into the apartment, I noticed something strange about his expression. His face looked pale, and his movements seemed tense. He did not greet me the way he normally would. Instead, he walked slowly into the living room and stood near the window. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he turned toward me with a look in his eyes that I had never seen before. It was not anger. It was disappointment. A quiet, painful disappointment that cut deeper than any shouted accusation. Daniel took a slow breath before speaking. He explained that he had stopped by the building office earlier that morning to speak with Michael about the rent situation. He had hoped to negotiate more time, just like I had tried to do a few days earlier, but the conversation had not gone the way he expected. According to Daniel, Michael had behaved in a very strange way. Instead of discussing the rent like a normal landlord, Michael had simply looked at him calmly and said something that made Daniel uncomfortable. He told Daniel that the rent problem had already been taken care of. The moment I heard those words, my stomach dropped. Daniel continued explaining what happened. He said Michael had told him not to worry anymore. He said everything between us had been handled privately and that there was no need to stress about the payment. Daniel said the tone in Michael's voice had felt unsettling, almost like he was hiding something. As Daniel finished telling the story, his eyes slowly moved toward me. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. He knew. Maybe he did not know every detail, but he knew enough. My heart began beating violently inside my chest. The silence between us stretched painfully across the room. Daniel studied my face carefully, as if searching for confirmation of something he already suspected. Then he asked a simple question. He asked if there was something I wanted to tell him. My mind felt trapped between truth and fear. Part of me wanted to deny everything. I wanted to protect the fragile pieces of our marriage that still remained. But another part of me knew that lies would only make the damage worse. The guilt had already grown too heavy to carry. So I told him. Not every detail, but enough for him to understand what had happened. As the words left my mouth, I watched the pain slowly spread across Daniel's face. The man who once loved me more than anything in the world stood there in complete silence. He did not shout. He did not throw anything. His quiet reaction hurt more than any anger could have. After I finished speaking, Daniel simply nodded slowly. Then he walked into the bedroom and closed the door. That was the moment I truly understood the depth of my mistake. But the story did not end there. Later that evening, there was another knock at the apartment door. When I opened it, Michael Bennett was standing in the hallway again. This time his expression looked different. There was no softness in his eyes, only seriousness. I stepped outside the apartment so Daniel would not hear the conversation. Michael spoke calmly, but his words carried a strange tension. He explained that our situation had become more complicated than I realized. At first I did not understand what he meant. Then he revealed something that completely shocked me. Michael admitted that he had known Daniel long before he ever bought the apartment building. Years earlier, they had worked for the same construction company. According to Michael, Daniel had once made a decision that cost him a promotion and a major financial opportunity. Michael believed Daniel had betrayed him professionally. He believed Daniel had destroyed his career path. For years he carried resentment. When he eventually purchased this apartment building and saw Daniel's name on the tenant records, he recognized it immediately. And then he saw me. Michael explained that he had been watching our lives quietly ever since. He noticed the tension in our marriage. He noticed the loneliness in my behavior. And slowly he began forming a plan to hurt Daniel in the deepest way possible. By taking the one person Daniel loved most, me. When those words finally settled into my mind, a cold wave of horror moved through my body. The entire situation had been carefully calculated. My moment of weakness had been part of someone else's revenge. Michael looked at me quietly after revealing the truth. Then he said something that I will never forget. He said revenge often feels satisfying at first, but eventually it leaves nothing behind except emptiness. With that, he turned and walked down the hallway without another word. I stood there frozen for a long moment, struggling to process everything I had just heard. Inside the apartment, Daniel remained in the bedroom with the door closed. The silence between us felt heavier than anything I had ever experienced. In one single night, loneliness, temptation, and revenge had destroyed the fragile pieces of our lives. And the truth was painfully simple. If I had chosen differently that night, none of it would have happened. But life does not offer second chances for certain decisions. Some mistakes leave permanent scars. Weeks later, Daniel eventually moved out of the apartment. Our marriage quietly ended soon after. The rent was paid, but the cost was far greater than money. I lost my husband. Daniel lost his trust. And Michael lost the satisfaction he thought revenge would bring. Sometimes I still think about that night when the storm was falling outside my window, the night my rent was due, and the night my landlord had another plan. If you have listened to this story until the end, I truly appreciate your time and attention. Your support means more than you may realize. If you are new here, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps keep these powerful and emotional stories coming. Now, I want to ask you something very important. Do you think my loneliness was enough to justify the choice I made that night? Or do you believe that some lines should never be crossed no matter how broken a marriage becomes? Share your thoughts in the comments. I would really like to hear your perspective.